This is the Everyday Fray podcast, hosted by Michael Howie.
Hello, friend. I'm Michael Howie, and this is episode 6 of the Everyday Fray podcast. A world of fantastic adventure is only a piece of paper, a pencil, and a few dice away. The tabletop game of Dungeons & Dragons has thrilled people across North America for decades and continues to grow and evolve with its players. And now, two passionate therapeutic game masters in Seattle are breaking through the barriers of mental health with the mighty pen and paper. Adam Davis and Adam Jones created the Wheelhouse Workshop, a setting for their therapeutic game sessions, focusing on helping teens become more confident, creative, and socially capable. Through a world filled with goblins, magic, mystery, and, yes, Dungeons with Dragons, the pair are able to use a combination of their training in psychology, education, and drama therapy to develop and practice skills needed by their patients, to whom they refer as players. This wonderful program that combines two of my personal passions is showing real results for kids who may be burned out on therapy or continue to struggle with social anxiety, ADHD, or other challenges. To discuss the development of the program, the gameplay and mechanics of therapeutic RPGs, and why a screen-free fantasy world is giving kids real-world success, Adam and Adam joined the Everyday Fray podcast. I thought an interesting place to start is maybe how the two of you decided that sort of this combined interest you both have in, obviously in therapy. You both have that backgrounds, as well as Dungeons and Dragons, and then you got together and made this happen. I mean, there's got to be a couple of conversations over beer there, where one of you said, "You know what we should do?"
Actually, surprisingly, it was very few conversations over beer. There have been a lot since then.
A lot over coffee, actually. We were very Seattle about that.
Yeah, that's pretty true. Wow. A lot of coffee conversations. So originally, Adam and I were in grad school, and we were actually in this class called multicultural understanding or something like that, where you learn about different cultures and you talk about the cultures you come from. And I gave a presentation where I talked a little about being a part of geek culture, and I think I used like a D20 as a symbol as a part of my presentation. And Adam also talked a little about geek culture. And at the time, he was actually working for another organization that had improv and Dungeons and Dragons groups for social skill development that were a little more like drop-in groups than they were like sort of intentionally facilitated. And Adam had lost his partner, the person he was running groups with, and he needed another facilitator. And so he walked up to me after one of the classes. We barely knew each other at the time. And he was like, "Hey, do you want to get paid to come play Dungeons and Dragons and do improv?" And I was like, yes, absolutely. I want to do that. I want to do that.
Yeah, that's a pretty easy answer, eh?
Mm-hmm. And ultimately, when we started running the groups, it was we would run an improv group and then a Dungeons and Dragons group back to back. And because Adam had all this background in drama therapy, he was finding ways to really intentionally facilitate the improv group using his newfound understanding of drama therapy. And so he would do things like play games that particularly oriented towards eye contact and towards getting comfortable in your own skin. You had other examples.
Sure. There's so I had been teaching drama for about 5 years before I started doing this, but I was getting into drama therapy, and so there were definitely times where I would know the participants in the group, and I'd know the things they were working on, and a lot of the people in that group were dealing with autism-related challenges, and so I would play a game that helps them become more comfortable with eye contact or help them become more aware of how their body relates to other people in space. And so it was a really easy translation from the kinds of drama therapy activities I was learning in school and the implementation in this group to make them really focused and targeted for these kids. And then we would go from there and start doing a Dungeons and Dragons group, which at the time when we sort of took them over, they were just drop-ins. We'd use modules, or the kids would DM for each other. It wasn't particularly intentional. And so once we got this lens on looking at a player's needs or a participant's needs and figuring out how to meet those needs, we started doing that in Dungeons and Dragons in the same way. We would have a player who was working on or struggling with a specific thing, and then we would design a way for that to come up in the game for them to practice and build those skills.
That's really interesting, and I would imagine that. I mean, if we sort of look at the mechanics of the drama therapy, is it very simply just sort of finding a way to practice skills that you're uncomfortable with? And the way I'm sort of envisioning this right now is I'm in a new CBT group for my generalized anxiety disorder. And what keeps coming up, and what my wife, who is a social worker, keeps reminding me is it's all about practice. So is that kind of the same underlying mechanic of just keep sort of trying to do it a little differently or trying a little harder to do it in a fun atmosphere?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, actually, I think mental health in general could kind of be broken down into two parts, which is basically identify what's going on and why that's going on, and then find ways to, I guess, practice or address that challenge. And functionally, social skills or dealing with anxiety is a lot about practice. It's a lot about being able to take the skills that are helping you either increase your competency with that or decrease the experiences that you're getting, the symptoms that you're having, and practice them again and again until you're much more confident and comfortable with using those skills. Our philosophy is very much on the idea that practice becomes a lot easier if you're having fun.
Yeah, that makes a certain amount of sense, I would imagine. And this is a very interesting mashup of things for me, because these are both obviously things I'm interested in, Dungeons and Dragons, as well as mental health. And what I think will be interesting is for this audience right now, I would believe a lot of them may not understand Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, most people, if you have not played or known someone who plays, your vision is of a bunch of guys sitting around in the basement in the 70s and 80s playing. Or if you're a bit younger, maybe it's seeing a bunch of guys sitting around in the basement playing in the 80s on Stranger Things. So how do we maybe sort of explain what, and Dungeons and Dragons obviously is probably the biggest one, but what an RPG is in this way? Because I think everybody knows what improv is, and you know what some of these sort of drama classes, before we started talking about high school drama class, everybody's got a little bit of experience with that, so they have some version of it in their mind. But RPGs do, for a lot of people, sort of have this, you can call it geek chick, or you can chic, or maybe just simply an unknown. How do we introduce that concept?
We're very lucky in the fact that we live in Seattle. And we work out of Kirkland. And so Wizards of the Coast is right around the corner. Paizo is just around the corner. Nintendo is just around the corner. So we have a lot of people in this area who grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons or have played Shadowrun, which is set in Seattle. So there's a lot of really good community here that understands what role-playing games are. And a lot of our participants have parents that grew up playing. So it's less of a sell than you might imagine. And we've talked to people around the country who are trying to start something up in middle America somewhere and don't have that. And so it's a little bit harder for them to start a group because they're having to do a lot more convincing, a lot more referencing the dark period in the 80s where everyone was scared of it. And here, our parents often played it in the 80s or the 70s. So it's a little bit easier. We also have conversations with parents that are often referred to us by counselors. And so once we've won over some therapists by speaking their language, we've got some great referral sources that will convince the parents of the benefits of it.
But for the purposes of the podcast, let's sort of explain a little. So we've gotten much better at explaining to parents who have no idea what RPGs are or what Dungeons and Dragons is, to give them a little bit of an idea for what it looks like. So the first thing that we usually say is it's played at a table. There are no screens of any kind. It's all pieces of paper and dice and pencils. There's one person who acts as the sort of referee of the game, the sort of head storyteller. And that person describes things that are going on in the world. They're often called the Dungeon Master. They describe things that are going on in the world, and they describe the outcomes of the things that all the players at the table want to do. And then each player at the table plays a single character in an adventure where they're playing on a team together and trying to overcome challenges that come up. So to give an example of what that looks like, the Dungeon Master might say something like, you walk into a room. You can see that the room itself is made mostly of stone, and the walls and the floor and the ceiling are all stonework, kind of beautiful stonework. And it stretches around. The room's basically a big square room, but across the other side of the room, you see that there's a wooden door with a portcullis down in front of it, which is like bars that sort of raise and lower. But right now they are down in front of the door across the hall. And in the very center of the room, there is a giant lever. And then the players from that point have the option to choose what they want their character in this world to do. So the player might choose for their character to...
I run over there and I pull the lever.
Which is what most characters do. And then the dungeon master continues to describe what happens in the world as a result of the actions that the player said. So the dungeon master would say, as you pull the lever, you hear a ka-chunk and churning sound of gears in the floor below you, and the sound sort of stretches out until you can hear it in the walls and then eventually into the ceiling.
Does the door open?
And then you notice as spikes lower from the ceiling, and the ceiling starts slowly lowering towards you. And then the player now has to problem solve the situation. They're now stuck in a room with spikes lowering from the ceiling, and they have to figure out what to do. And that's most of what the game is, really. The player also has a piece of paper that tells them things like how strong they are, or what equipment they might have on them. Or this takes place in Dungeons and Dragons, at least, is in a world that's has spells and magic, and it's very Lord of the Rings-esque. And so it also, you might cast spells to help you solve this puzzle. And of course, you might rely on your teammates and what your teammates want to do.
Well, and I'm going to ask a question, playing devil's advocate here. Would it be harmful to take individuals, especially youth who maybe are having trouble interacting socially, and insert them into a fantasy world? We play around a lot with the concept of where your character is and where you are. We always have check-in questions as a part of our process and check-out questions. And the whole idea that you're making a character that is different from you and in a world that is clearly fantasy, but that you are taking a part of yourself and putting it into that character is a huge part of why this is effective as a form of therapy. But ultimately, it's always clear to our players that this is a fantasy world, and there are things that you might do differently in a fantasy world than in the real world. I think almost the thing that you're sort of hinting at is like the game can be violent at times, and there may be things in the world that can in the Dungeons and Dragons world that require you to be violent in exchange. And one of the most important things to keep in mind throughout that process is that the world can be kind of violent sometimes. Those are things that absolutely do exist in the world. But ultimately, you are placing yourself into a fantasy world where you understand the differences between the world that's in front of you and the fact that you're sitting at a table and playing a game.
And we do a lot of intentional pointing at the players and the characters and very clearly reference when a player is getting a little bit too invested in their character, they're over-identifying. We can actually we have a lot of tricks up our sleeve to point at them and let them know that they are not their characters, that their character might be upset, or their character is really frustrated, or their character has done this thing that may need to atone for.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's one of the fun things, of course, with Dungeons and Dragons, depending on how advanced you get, is you develop these incredible backstories. And, I enjoy myself playing a barbarian, typically, like a half-orc barbarian or something, because I am a vegan and am completely against violence and a pacifist. So it's kind of fun. Like, you get to, you know what I mean? Like, I have no desire to hurt anything, but I get to once a month sit down with friends. We play online with Roll20 and, smash down doors and throw axes and do all these things because it's not real. And it's hard to explain sometimes how that works, though.
And actually, what you're talking about, this idea that you want to take on a different role than the person that you are, is a really, really important part, as actually sort of works into drama therapy, where we talk about role repertoire and sort of the roles that you can take on and the characters you can play and the versatility and flexibility that you can have and being able to play different things. And that's actually a super important aspect to being able to take perspective of other people in your everyday life, and being able to understand and see the viewpoints from many different sides. Very, very useful skills to have in other parts of your life too.
And in the game, sometimes you need to knock down a door. Mm-hmm. It is the appropriate response in the context of a dungeon. However, if you're going into a town to try to get some information from a diplomat, you may not want to smash down the door. So there's some context there that's really important context for people of any age to learn, is that sometimes it's okay to knock down a door and sometimes it's not. And picking as a team what your best strategies are is a really important skill.
Well, and of course, as adults, we tend to go a little overboard in what is appropriate and what is not appropriate in the game. Right. But I imagine with having, actual dungeon masters who are also therapists, you guys can probably help tone some of that down, as you said. And I would certainly hope that the kids are not quite as inventive as we are as adults.
Well, it totally depends. So there are definitely, I've had some players who are their characters would not take a stand, and they trusted every single person, every single NPC that they came across. They saw the good side in them, and they tried to convince every single villain to lay down their weapons and become a good guy. And that's a great first instinct to have, but it can't be the only instinct. So there were definitely times in the game where I would have to give them an NPC who ended up secretly being an Oni, or secretly being a vampire, or something that was trying to betray them, so that they could understand the multiple angles they needed to have in a conversation with somebody. That you couldn't always trust everybody right away, and you have to have a conversation to try to understand where that person is coming from.
A big part of our model is actually in able to emphasize the skills that the player is trying to build on. So if we have like a particularly shy player, or a player who's really having a lot of trouble being outspoken and taking up space at the table, and they're playing a half-orc barbarian, for example, and they're going around and smashing down doors, a lot of times that's a pretty good growth point for them. They're shy in the other parts of their lives, or they have trouble with some of those things in other parts of their lives, and this is a place for them to explore some of those ideas and see the times that might have some benefit for them to take up some space and to feel rewarded by that experience. By contrast, if we had a particularly outspoken player who often took up a lot of space, and they played a half-orc barbarian and often took up a lot of space, we might challenge them a lot more in that way, and put them into more situations where suddenly they have to be diplomatic with somebody, and they can't just bash down a door, because now that's their point of challenge.
Well, in this, I was thinking about this as you explained one point a little earlier. In the case of bullying, I'm always conflicted, because you sort of, on one hand, you need to, remind them it's not their fault and that this is the other person's sort of issue. But at the same time, this is one of those, there are bullies in real life and you need to stand up to them. And in the game, you stand up to bullies and you kill them with an axe. And is that something that is that an opportunity to have a discussion for you when you're talking about maybe a scenario in the game that reflects on real life scenarios?
And that's a super good question.
Sure. I think that if we were working with somebody who was dealing with a bully in real life, we wouldn't have them kill their analog bully with an axe in the game, because that's not really a direct translation. But we might have the bully need to be discredited in front of an audience or something like that, so that it's a strategic comeuppance instead of a purely violent one.
In one case, so we do actually have a lot of players who are just generally bullied, as they tend to be really geeky kids, and so not necessarily dealing with one direct or one very specific instance of bullying, but generally they're often made fun of at school and things like that. In one case, we designed this very elaborate dream sequence. Well, the players, as a party, had to go into the dreams of it was actually a nomad monk who, at an early age, had been given the name of a book that the players needed as a cipher to translate an ancient text. So they had to go into his dreams and track down where in the dreams he was given the name of this book so they could use it. And so they traveled through his dreams and saw his life experiences. His dreams were actually about the life that he had lived and the ways that some of the most important aspects of his life. And in the first instance, they actually the monk had been kidnapped by the bad guy, so they actually had to role play as the bad guys kidnapping the monk in the first place. And then once that dream sequence sort of ended and it faded to black, the next dream sequence would start. And the next one was the funeral of the monk's wife, and they had to give a eulogy to say the nice things about the monk's wife, not knowing anything about her. And then the next one was the wedding of the monk and the wife, because we're going sort of backwards in time through the monk's life. And then they had to give a gift to the monk and his wife to show their appreciation for them getting married. And at the wedding, the monk talked to each of them as if he'd known them for years, as if they were lifelong friends, and even mentions to them, if it weren't for you, I never would have become the good person that I am. And then once that faded to black, the next series of sort of dream circumstance was that they were being bullied by the monk. And in each of these dream circumstances, the way they had to sort of overcome the experience was they had to play into the dream. They had to sort of do what the dream wanted them to do, because if they went against the dream, it was a little like Inception, where if they went against the dream, the NPCs of the dream would turn and look at them, and they would become suspicious that they were infiltrating this monk's dream space. So they had to play along as best they could. And the players figure out that what they need to give to the monk, they don't need to fight him. They need to convince him that this is wrong. And it's sort of through reflection of going back in time that them convincing him that this was wrong in this experience is what turns him into a good person later on.
That's a really nice story just on its own. You know what I mean? Like, that's like, I definitely see the act of empathy being explored there for the players, but it's also a very well thought out story. So that's a very neat sort of aspect of this, and I guess that must be enjoyable for the two of you too.
Oh yeah.
I mentioned
being able to sort of sit and play.
I mentioned earlier that we used to use modules, and when we very, very first started, we gave up on that about 2 weeks in, and now all 5 of our weekly groups are all entirely homebrew adventures and homebrewed worlds. We make up the entire world uniquely for each of the 5 groups. How
do your parents explain what you do?
Like our own parents?
Yeah.
I
don't know.
Well, in addition to running Wheelhouse Workshop, I am also a private practice therapist, and I specialize in seeing geeks and gamers in therapy. So I imagine my parents just say that I'm really geeky and talk to people all the time. That's
it's such a it's got so much nuance to it and so much depth to it. I just think about when I was a journalist, how easy that was for my parents. Say he works for a newspaper and end the conversation. And now it's not nearly as easy.
I don't think I've ever heard my parents try to explain it to someone else without just turning to me and being like, "Oh yeah, you should tell them all about it." And then I'm always excited.
I think what my mom does is, I think she has like a draft email that has links to press or panels that we've done. So when someone says, "What does Adam do?" she goes, "I'm going to send you an email," and then she doesn't have to explain it. I think so I have to keep her updated whenever we get new press, so she can add it to her.
I will say, like, fairly recent, my mom and my dad have definitely never played Dungeons and Dragons. Although fairly recently, I realized that my dad had never played, and we were out at lunch somewhere or something like that. And I was like, well, I should run you guys through like a real quick example. And my dad's an attorney, and I said, what character do you want to play? You can play pretty much anything you want, because this was just a simple like sort of storytelling stripped down version. And I was like, you can play anything you want. What do you want to play? And he said, I want to play a solicitor, which is just an attorney. It's just like an old word for an attorney. So he just played himself apparently. Excellent. In the D&D world. I thought that was pretty cool.
How do you roll for that?
Do you roll for a really high charisma check and a pretty high intelligence check and a low strength, I think.
Speaking of rolling, one of the aspects for Dungeons and Dragons and many tabletop games in general is rolling dice, and that's deciding, how well something is done. So as you said, the character decides, I want to do X. And then, as we were just saying, you'll roll a check. So that's, okay, well, you want to see, kicking down the door. Mm-hmm. How hard do you kick it? So you roll, a 20-sided die, and the game master or dungeon master has decided you have to hit this number at least to succeed on this task. Mm-hmm. And that's a large aspect of the mechanics of this kind of game. How do the kids, and I'm sort of guessing the age range is somewhat broad here, so particularly the younger kids, react to the concept of sometimes you don't get to control what happens, even though you very clearly say, this is what I want to do, this is what my character should do, but it's not happening?
Actually, what we have found is that it works surprisingly well. We have very few people who really struggle with the idea. Once we explain how dice work and the idea that rolling high means you're successful and rolling low means you might not be. Once we explain some of those concepts and they get a chance to sort of try out that experience, most of the time they're pretty okay with it. It's sort of an understanding that because now the success and failure aspects of this are a little external from themselves, they're usually disappointed that they didn't succeed. But we rarely ever get reactions that are, really frustrated or really over the top of like, I needed to succeed at that, or tantrums or anything like that for our kids. Most of the time, because we've sort of externalized this piece, and they do get some control over it, they get to be the one who rolls the die. And so it feels a little less like they are failing, and a little more like, well, their character's circumstances wound up such that they weren't successful, which I think really helps.
It tends to be frustrating, especially for brand new players. But one of the ways we try to navigate that is two things. One, we never have a player roll for something we want them to be successful in. So if a player is really working on self-advocacy, I'm not going to make them roll persuasion or diplomacy in order to be successful, if I want them to be successful for taking the risk. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of role-playing ROLE versus ROLL playing that we do, depending on what the player needs.
Well, the same could be said for the other side. If we know that they're not going to be successful, we're not going to have them roll dice to give them that chance, because they could always roll a 20, and then you have to figure out how to handle that.
But the other thing that we do with new players especially is we try to take low rolls and turn them into new opportunities. Mm-hmm. So if someone rolls a fail at something, it's not just the answer is no. It's the answer is no, but you see something.
So
well, and that's very much from that improv side of
absolutely
things.
And that's a big part of where I come from as a game master, where we come from as practitioners, is that we're really trying to get the players to realize that a failure is not a failure. It's a temporary setback. It's an obstacle, yet another obstacle, but there's always opportunity in every failure. And we do that by making critical fails hilarious and fun. And we also do that by, if you're trying to search for something, you may not see it, but you might have overheard someone saying something when you were over there in that side of the room, or it takes all kinds of different approaches.
You gather other information. So in the example that I gave earlier, where there's the big lever in the middle of the room and the spikes are coming down, let's say Adam's character decides that he's going to try to pull the lever the other way. And I say, oh, okay, well, you find the lever is very hard to pull. Roll me a strength check. And he rolls a 2. And I would say, well, you find that the lever is actually impossible to pull. It's locked in place. But you discover while you're trying to tug at this lever that there's a little area that you can maybe access at the base of the lever that might give you access to the gears underneath. So he wasn't successful at doing what he wanted to do, which was to pull the lever the other way and maybe stop the spikes that way. But he was successful in discovering other things in the process of trying.
Oh, that's really excellent. And I need to ask, how do you get the kids to really buy into it? I mean, that's one of the fun things about role playing, is you can sort of have a mild buy-in or a full-on role playing experience. But I would imagine, especially if you're dealing with people with social anxiety, like again, sitting, I find it amusing in group sessions when the counselor or the therapist or whomever says, and who would like to read their response to like a workshop thing. And the whole room just goes dead quiet. Because it's, again, I mean, that's what you expect. We're in an anxiety group. But how do you get kids who typically may not want to be the first one to talk or may not be comfortable in that social setting to be able to buy in to the concept of role-playing and become actively involved?
Well, I think there's two parts to that. The first is because the game is really inherently fun, and we do very little of the sort of sitting down and giving direct instruction for social skill development. A lot of it is through the game, and so there's definitely an experience of I'm sitting down and I'm playing a game, and it's a fun experience. So we want to make sure that it stays fun for that reason. But the second part of it is getting engagement from like a really quiet player or a player who's really struggling with how to role play is a long process. You have to get them comfortable to that idea. We've developed some tricks to that end.
We, as we mentioned before, there's a lot of drama, a lot of improv in our games, and so a lot of the characters we play as NPCs serve as the kind of social glue. So there are lots of silly voices that Adam and I will do in talking to these young people, and it's really kind of a regression into like early childhood playground unstructured play. So I'll be one of our favorite characters on day one for brand new players is we have a guy named Seamus who runs a soup kitchen, and they go to his soup kitchen because that's where we start our adventures. And they just happen to be in town visiting the soup kitchen because it's the best soup kitchen in town. In fact, it says that's the name of the soup kitchen, the best soup kitchen in town. And they go in and they sit down at their tables, and then Seamus comes over and takes their orders. But Seamus is like a funny old man who gives them compliments, and he kind of, depending on whether it's Adam or me, we have different silly voices for him. And he comes over and he's like, "Wow, that's a super cool sword you got there. What kind of stuff do you like to stab with it?" And they're like, "Well, I like to stab monsters." "Monsters? Well, that's pretty scary. You must be a hero." And then he goes around and gets everybody's orders, and he's kind of a silly old man, and he's like, "What kind of soup do you want?" And the players will say like, "Well, I want, I want potato soup." "I got the best potato soup in town." And they go around and there'll be somebody who's like, "I don't want any soup." "Oh, I don't want any soup. We got some. I don't want any soup. I'll get you a big bowl. I don't want any soup." And so it's just about yes-anding them. And so then after a while, they kind of feel an endearing response to this Seamus character. And so they're all having soup, and it's wonderful, and they're drinking soup out of mugs, and it's fantastic. And then a necromancer comes in the door and kills Seamus.
That's kind of severe.
He doesn't always die. He doesn't always die. Sometimes he just gets a curse, and the players will have to go on a quest to find the thing to cure him. And then when they come back, they cure Seamus, and they realize that he was a secret member of a secret society and guarding an ancient chalice that is wanted by an evil cult. And so then they have to go secure the chalice for Seamus's secret organization. But it all starts with a silly soup maven named Seamus.
And the thing that does, aside from kind of pierce you in the middle of your heart, is it really makes you hate the necromancer, which, as far as just getting the players all to want to be on the same side and have a sort of a rallying thing to pull them together, is very important. So from that point forward, they don't care about other stuff. They want to kill the necromancer. And that really, really pulls them forward.
That's certainly true just in general storytelling, is getting that sort of falling in love with the characters and seeing them as friends. So then when something happens, you say, "I gotta know." It's like what keeps you up at 2 a.m. finishing that book or until the end of the chapter. Now, I'm curious about the check-in questions. You'd mentioned this. And there's on this wonderful Geek and Sundry story, they've shared some of your Instagram posts, and there's a check-in question. What is something you like that most people don't like? What about for your character? And bonus, answer like you were revealing a secret to a friend. So you said this is a way of sort of maybe helping control the fantasy versus reality, but what else do these check-in and check-out questions do?
Well, we get a lot of players who come to us pretty socially isolated. So one thing that the check-in question does is gives them an opportunity to talk about something that's personal to them at various stages. So when we first start out, the check-in question might be something like, what is your favorite season and why? And what about your character? And that does two things. One, it gets the players to realize that they can share something with a group and have other people understand what they're saying. And the second thing that it does is it gives us an opportunity to understand how much they are identifying with their character. Because if they said, I like the summer because I like to go swimming, and my character Gragnold likes the summer because he likes to go swimming too, then we might go, okay, well, personally, while we're planning for our groups, we understand that person is very identifying with Gragnold. And so we can use that proxy to help them build whatever skills they need to build.
By contrast, they might say that they really like the summer, but Gragnold, their character, likes the winter because he's a hardy guy. And it gives us some more information. It lets us know that they are playing a character that's purposefully different from themselves. And so we can then use that information to say, okay, now we can challenge their character. We can use that to say their character needs to succeed on a lot of stuff that their character is trying to be good at, to give the player opportunity to explore those things.
The other thing that the check-in question does that's nice is it provides a boundary. So the players know when we start our game and they know when they end the game because we always start with a check-in question and we always end with a check-out question. So the container there is really nice. You asked earlier about whether it was risky at all for some players to be entering into a fantasy world. And for some players, it might be. They might over-identify with their character, but providing a very ritualized entrance and exit to every single session has been really nice because we always are ourselves when we walk out the door. We are never Gragnold. We are never our characters. And part of that is the ritualized intro and outro.
Okay, and I've got sort of two final questions. I'm going to do them backwards. I noticed that you do offer training to other therapists and other individuals with an interest in this. What is the training and consultation like, and what kind of reaction have you seen? I mean, do other therapists sort of say, this is silly, or do they say, this is a wonderful idea? What's the general feeling from the community at large?
We've actually had no one tell us that it's silly. We've had an amazing response. I think there's a lot of therapists out there that are looking for a way to have their participants excited about going into session. Mm-hmm. Because that's one of the things that is so true about our players is that they're excited to come and hang out with some therapists, which is kind of rare. So that we've had a really, really positive response to our work from a lot of therapists. As far as what it looks like, we are actually just launching the training and consultation as a response to a lot of inquiries about it. So we haven't hosted any trainings in our current office yet, or our soon-to-be office for that matter, but we did do a 6-hour training at Antioch University, Seattle, where Adam and I both graduated, that was for master's level clinicians to help them. And it was really, really interesting to see therapists try to be game masters as opposed to trying to see game masters trying to be therapists.
For the most part, a lot of it is us talking about sort of the foundations of the model, and at this point, has it been 5 years, 6 years, something like that? 5 years, I think. So we've been doing this for a while, and we've developed a lot of sort of our own terminology on it, and have really been working to solidify a model that we can hand to other people, and we can teach other people how to do. It was one of the things that we would love to see more of, is more people doing similar work across the world. And so a lot of the training and consultation is really about being able to show other people, here's what we've discovered in the 5 years that we've been doing this, and really being able to narrow down what works and what doesn't work. And then the consultation is much more about let's give you some tools. Here's some ideas for storylines that you can take into your game, some ideas for how to collaboratively create worlds together, how to get engagement, or how to deal with specific issues. All of our stuff is social skill oriented, so we've seen a lot of varied issues, including ADHD and varying levels of autism challenges, and social anxiety and even depression and things like that in our group. And so how do you deal with the different personalities and the different challenges that are going to come to your table? How do you design things to help with that?
Yeah, and it's not something that I would imagine any therapist, regardless of their training, could really just walk in and do, because there is obviously a lot of work the two of you have done in refining this, but there's even just the base level of understanding the mechanics of the game, which does have a learning curve in itself, and vice versa, of course. You would not want me to go and say, I'm going to now be a therapist and play Dungeons and Dragons. So it's neat that you kind of are evolving this tool to sort of include all of those different elements.
And one thing we've discovered is that our approach is different. We've met a lot of other people as we've traveled around the country talking about this. We've met a lot of people who are doing applied role-playing in their own groups or in their own schools or libraries or community centers. And we discovered that our approaches are very different. A lot of people use a very behavioral approach where they use the in-game economies as a token economy to help support specific behaviors. And ours, because of drama therapy and systems backgrounds, looks very, very different from that. We take a lot more of a narrative transference approach.
That sounds very fancy. I don't know what that means, though.
Yeah, that's
the term that we like to give, especially when we're talking to therapists about this, is scaffolded and aesthetically distanced play-based narrative transference, which is the
very impressive.
Thanks.
And then we break all that down. But a functionally narrative transference is the idea that you can take away things from the experience that you're having, and those can be internalized things that you have. This is actually something that can happen not just in a role-playing game, but when you go see a movie. If I watch Up and I cry during the opening scenes of Up, and it allows me to then reflect on the way in which some things in my life have made me sad, or losses within my life have made me sad. That might be an aspect of narrative transference. I've taken things that I've seen in story and in character, and I've used them to internalize and understand parts of myself. So in the case of role-playing games, it is I get to use my character and put my character into those situations, or through the help of the dungeon master, have my character be forced to be challenged in certain ways, which then I can use to help reflect and better understand myself, and then take those things into my own life to be used outside of the group or outside of the narrative.
I think it also means if you tear up at the beginning of Up, you are human.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it's interesting. I sometimes reflect on this with some of my clients where we talk about Pixar films and things. But there's everybody has experienced some form of loss. Mm-hmm. You can't go through life without experience loss. So the opening to Up is perfect because it's horrible loss that has happened, and it explains all of it through just pictures and then sad music, and it's it tugs at those heartcords.
And finally, the ultimate question is, does it work? What kind of success have you seen? I mean, clearly you're doing it's working to a degree as you're continuing to do it and you're growing, but how do you measure? What do you see? And what kind of examples can you give to, I would imagine, in particular, parents who are trying to find a way to help their children?
We have some parents tell us that this is the only place that their child looks forward to going. That before they started playing Dungeons and Dragons in our groups, they wouldn't ever leave the house. And so we are seeing those players who started off not ever wanting to leave the house, and then they start coming to the group. They start realizing that socializing can be rewarding. And then when players, especially the players in our groups, start to exchange contact information and then reach out to each other outside of groups to have play dates, that has been a really huge benchmark of success for us, is to see young people who are historically very socially isolated start to take the agency to reach out to each other and manage their own social schedules with each other. Has been a huge gold standard for the kind of work that we do with these young people.
We've gotten a chance, because we've now done this for for so long, we've gotten a chance to watch some of our players grow up. We've had some players that have been with us since the beginning, and we get a chance to watch them, graduate high school and go on and go to college or get jobs. And thinking back to where they were when they started, especially, those were not things that were on the table for them. And it's only through the fact that they've been so willing to open up in the group, and also willing to practice a lot of the challenging things that we've put them into as their characters in the game, that I think they've been able to really be successful at that. We are starting to try to do some like surveys and like try to get some real hard data on what kind of progress we're seeing. We're working with some other groups that are trying to do some research along with our groups as well. But that's a long process. So we don't have any like hard data just yet, but that may be on the horizon for being able to really demonstrate in a quantitative way how effective RPG groups are.
And one of the challenges to that is that a lot of the players in our groups have been in and out of therapy for their whole lives, and they can smell when we start using therapy language, and they I don't know how successful it would be to try to give them a survey, like a real indexing of their psychological experience before they would realize that this is a therapy, and then they might not enjoy it as much. They might not be able to get the same thing out of it. So we've been really resistant or hesitant to do any of those intake-outtake measurements that might feel like a little too clinical for our players. We have had some players come to us. One of my particular favorite stories that just reminds me why I do what I do is I had a player that wasn't originally intended to be in my group, but I invited them in. They were sitting in the lobby while someone else they knew was in the group. And so I invited them in to play with us just because I didn't want them to sit by themselves in the lobby. And they played with us on the first day, and then they came back the next week, and then they signed up. And then they ended up joining, and they've been in the group now for almost 2 years, I think. And this particular player's parent said that a psychotherapist had told them that they would need years and years of psychotherapy before they would ever be able to join a social group. And this player has been in our social group for 2 years, and they are now enjoying a very active social life with friends. And I can't take full credit for it. But I just know that was the before and after. And that is a story that I on days that I've worked 12 hours, those are the stories that keep me excited about the work that we're doing.
You can learn more about the Wheelhouse Workshop and get in touch with Adam Davis and Adam Johns by visiting their website at wheelhouseworkshop.com or finding them across social media. I'd love to hear your experience with RPGs and how it's helped with your mental health challenges, or if this is something you'd be interested in getting your kids involved with. Connect with me at michael@everydayfraypodcast.com, leave a comment on everydayfraypodcast.com, or find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. This is the Everyday Fray Podcast. I'm Michael Howie, and my journey is far from over.